All right, the Senate approving a Democratic budget in a late-night marathon of voting.
The ayes are 50, the nays are 49. Without objection.
The Senate has passed a budget.
Well, that was about 5 a.m. Everybody was a little bleary-eyed. There's Patty Murray, who sponsored this budget. The bill calls for nearly $1 trillion in tax increases over the coming decade while protecting safety net programs, but still, the non-binding measure is unlikely to pass Congress in its current form. No surprise there. Shira Toeplitz joins us, staff writer for Roll Call. Shira, good to see you. All right, so was this meaningful or political theater, and not very good theater, by the way?
Well, it was mostly political theater, Greg, to be honest with you. I think the only meaning in it is the fact that the Senate has not done one of these budget vote-a-ramas and has not tried to pass a budget even in the last 4 years. So that in itself is a little monumental, okay? Once every 4 years, it's like a leap year. But really, it was a lot of amendments going back and forth. It was an opportunity for senators to put legislation on the table, to force their colleagues to vote for or against some hot-button issues, and also for Democrats to say, all right, we put a budget on the table and we technically passed it.
Yeah, the
even
real
though it was
fight,
only by one vote.
I mean, look, the real fight is coming up this summertime, right?
Absolutely. The real fight this summertime is going to be two-pronged. You're going to have a debt ceiling debate once again when funding for the government runs out, and the president, the White House, really wants to have a deal with some kind of tax increase, and House Republicans do not want to include that all in any kind of package. They want cuts that match the amount the debt increase is limited. It's going to be a big fight. And then secondly, there's still talk about a grand bargain to get a new budget in place.
How do you handicap that?
I think this is probably the one of the better chances we've seen for
Really?
Congress to come, in a while, I think.
Why? Because the president is finally paying attention to his poll numbers, which are dropping considerably?
I think it's because the president is finally paying attention to Congress. The first term, he essentially ran against them for his re-election campaign. He didn't want to do much to do, didn't want much to do with Congress. He didn't really work with them. He didn't invite them up to the White House. This is the first time we've really seen him signs of actually reaching across those 16 blocks to Capitol Hill. Also, secondly, I think House Republicans have come to the point where they really see that the American public is sick of what I call crisis fatigue, right? Every 3 to 5 months, there's some crisis in Congress. They go down to the last minute. They're about to turn the lights off, and then they pass some kind of continuing resolution. I mean, not just House Republicans. To be fair, Congress in general, because the American public is really sick of this kind of legislation. There's obviously some political motivation there.
Yeah, the ratings on Capitol Hill are lower than lawyers, which is astonishing. I'm a lawyer, so I can say that.
Yeah.
Look, there is growing voter anxiety over the debt, which is now approaching very quickly $17 trillion. And this budget, passed by the Senate Democrats, does not ever foresee balancing the federal budget. Instead, it spends all the new tax receipts and then some. Is that politically troublesome for them and for the president, especially as they approach next year's midterm elections?
It is a little troublesome. I think the American voter kind of has this expectation that the government should balance its books, right? That we shouldn't run a deficit, at least not one as large as it is right now. So yes, it is a little politically precarious. And I would say especially for the senators, the Democratic senators running for re-election in red states. And that is why during this big Senate budget vote, you saw 4 Democratic senators vote against Patty Murray's budget. They are all up for re-election in 2014, and they are all representing states Barack Obama lost.
Look, speaking of debt and deficit, President Obama said recently the debt is not an immediate problem. But by huge margins, Americans disagree. We'll put it up on the screen. Look at that. 68% of them disagree with the president on that. And they also think he's wrong about something else, spending. Let's look at the next polling data here. This is Fox News polls. They think his top priority should be cutting spending to reduce the deficit, not spend more taxpayer dollars to create jobs. Is that why President Obama seems to have dropped suddenly his campaign for spending, kind of realizing that he's pushing his job ratings down and in the process driving away potential voters?
I think there's definitely been a sense over the last month, especially when, as you point out, his poll numbers have gone down. The White House is not going to make these big campaigns go across the country asking for tax increases. But that is also because they're saving, I think, a lot of their ammunition for the budget fight this summer. And that's when you might see them make those requests again to say any kind of deal, any kind of grand bargain over the budget or any kind of grand bargain over the debt ceiling has to include some kind of tax increase.
The Keystone Pipeline managed to pass the Senate by a vote of 62 to 37. According to my count, 17 Democrats sided with the Republicans on the Keystone Pipeline. Does that increase its political fortunes and maybe prod the president to go against the environmentalists?
It does. It does. Seeing it pass the Senate, obviously, it has support in the House. Definitely puts the burden on the president to make a decision about whether or not he wants to sign off on this project. And from everything our reporters at Roll Call here, the decision is supposed to come in the second quarter of this year.
Yeah.
We'll see what he says, but it definitely puts the pressure on him.
And by the way, a lot of environmentalists say the building of the Keystone Pipeline will actually cut the carbon emissions. But that's a whole nother story. So, Shira Toeplitz, good to see you. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, Greg. Well, under orders to slash